Good, good. Are we good? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. It is so exciting to be here with you all today. This is my second time in Brazil. I came here about 6 years ago, actually, when I was finishing up my PhD research. And all of the instruments in my lab at the University of Johannesburg, they were breaking. And so thankfully, my PhD supervisor had a relationship with the University of Sao Paulo here in Brazil, and so I was able to come here and finish my research, and that was the first time I came. And let me tell you, for about 2.5 weeks, I ate nothing but pão de queijo. I lived off of pão de queijo. And I have been thinking for the last 6 years, when can I come back to Brazil and have more pão de queijo? So it's really great to be back and be here with you all today. I don't know everything that Marcos said, but I think he said that I don't speak Portuguese, okay? So I apologize for this. I don't speak any Portuguese, but I was born in Los Angeles, California. I grew up there, lived in Southern California for pretty much the first half of my life. And I speak pretty good Spanish. However, it's been a long time since I lived in Southern California, and my Spanish is getting worse and worse and worse. And so I'm pretty sure that your English is a lot better than my Spanish. So I actually originally, I had translated all of my slides into Portuguese. And I was ready to give you a full translated presentation. And then last night, we were having dinner with Marcos, and he said, no, Casey, you give the whole thing in English. He said, they will understand. And I said, are you sure, Marcos? He said, yes, I'm sure. You just give the English version. I said, okay. So here I am with the English version. This is the only Portuguese you're going to get in the whole presentation, okay? So I apologize for this, but if there's a problem, you have to talk to Marcos, okay? That's just how it is. And again, I would try to do this in Spanish, but I guarantee you that your English is a lot better than my Spanish. So a few initial things. This presentation is titled, What is the Theory of Intelligent Design? And this is based actually upon a book that I am writing titled, The Theory of Intelligent Design. Maybe someday before I die, I will finish this book. We'll see. I've been writing it for a couple years now, and it takes a lot of time. But I'm writing a book, and hopefully it'll come out maybe next year about explaining what is the theory of intelligent design. But I want to first just give some compliments to you guys, because I want you to know that at Discovery Institute in Seattle, Washington, we are so impressed with the work of TDI Brazil. Marcos Eberlin and his team are doing top quality research into the evidence regarding intelligent design. And on Wednesday, we got to visit ID Bird with Marcos Wesley. And he and his team are developing very, very high quality curriculum materials for kids. Better than anything we have in the United States. You guys are way ahead of us, let me tell you, okay? Plus, I think that TDI Brazil represents the largest group of pro-intelligent design scientists outside of the USA. And so a big part of our sort of goals and our efforts at Discovery Institute is to form an international network of pro-intelligent design scientists. So we want to get to know you and collaborate with you. So again, I apologize that I don't speak Portuguese, and I know that might be a barrier, but please come and talk to me before this conference is over. If you are a scientist or somebody who's doing research especially, I would love to meet you and find out more about who you are and what you are doing. Okay, so with that, let's get into the presentation. So I know that many of you are very accomplished speakers and promoters of intelligent design. So what I want to know today is how many of you have ever had this experience, okay? You are making a very careful, compelling, well-documented case for intelligent design. You're using books by Marcos Eberlin. You're using books by Steve Meyer and Michael Behe and all these people. And you're making an argument based upon the presence of information in DNA, protein complexity, molecular machines, or the fine-tuning of the universe. But then something happens. What happens? Well, the angry man comes. And the angry man, what does he say? Okay? What do you think is the angry man's #1 objection to intelligent design? Anybody want to shout out? What is the #1 objection that you see? Say again? Anisio, did you say it's not science? Yes, very, very good. that is the angry man's #1 objection to intelligent design. We have some very, very experienced people here. They know what it's like. They will say, you can't say that because that's not science. They won't even address the evidence you're presenting. They won't even say that your evidence is wrong. They'll just say that you can't say that because this is not science. They'll say that ID doesn't use the scientific method. They'll say ID isn't testable. They'll say ID doesn't do research, or ID doesn't publish peer-reviewed publications. By the way, really quick, when I asked AI to give me a little picture of an angry man, and it gave me a short guy with very thick eyebrows, and I thought, oh no, that looks kind of like me. But hopefully I'm not the angry man, okay? But this is what you hear, okay? You hear these arguments all the time when you try to argue for intelligent design. And this objection, this is not just some trivial academic debate we're having. This objection has real-world implications, because if you go out and you talk to people about why they reject intelligent design, this is probably the #1 reason why, if you see people in the scientific community who reject ID, this is what they will say. Or courts, this is what they will tell you, why you can't have intelligent design in the schools. The media, when they sort of treat intelligent design very badly and try to discriminate or marginalize it, they will say, oh, well, it's because it's not science. Science museums. In the United States right now, I'm kind of in a debate with the Smithsonian Institution. They're misrepresenting the evidence for evolution. They're making it sound stronger than it really is. But if you talk to them, why don't you have intelligent design? They will say, oh, it's because it's not science. Or even if you talk to your next door neighbor, Bob the atheist, this is the #1 reason he will give you for why they don't accept ID, because it's not science, okay? So, look, I'd like to think that I'm kind of well situated to be able to address this question of whether intelligent design is science and why it is science. Because I'm basically the research director at Discovery Institute, where I oversee an international research program, and we're funding projects all over the world. And how many of you guys have ever seen that meme that says, who I think I am, who they think I am, and then who I really am? Have you guys seen this meme? It's kind of a funny meme. So I want to do this meme for me really quick, okay? So who do I think I am? Well, this is who I think I am, okay? I think I'm like Batman, running the intelligent design research program, okay, blah, 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 blah. But who do they think I am? Basically, all the ID critics in the academy. They think I'm this, crazy guy with devil horns, wearing a MAGA hat, from the hillbilly guy up in Seattle, I guess. We don't really have hillbillies in Seattle, but, this is who they think I am, okay? But the reality, you guys, is this is who I really am. I'm just this tired guy who's Zooming all the time, answering emails and talking to scientists like Marcos, saying, Marcos, why didn't you publish that paper yet? When are you going to publish that paper, Or what do you need so we can support your research? This is what I really do. But I think that this does, in seriousness, this gives me a good position to be able to address the question of why ID is science. And there are many, many layers of responses. In fact, this objection that ID isn't science, it fails for many, many reasons, both theoretical and practical reasons. So we're going to see how the angry man reacts right now, okay? So he starts off saying, ID is not science, okay? And so we then make a counter-argument. Well, actually, you can't say ID is not science because there's no consensus definition of science. What do I mean by this? Well, the first problem with saying that ID is not science is that even philosophers of science don't really agree on how to define science. They don't have a consensus definition of science. So it's hard to claim that ID is not science when even philosophers of science can't agree on how to define science and what is or is not science. But we're not done yet, okay? We're going to put another argument on this side of the scale, and oh, look, the little man, he's going up here. This is another argument, that ID meets rigorous methodological definitions of science. What do I mean by this? ID is science because it uses the scientific method to make its claims. ID is historical science, and it makes a positive, predictive, testable case for intelligent design, which is supported by the evidence. We'll talk more about this very, very soon, okay? But we're still not done, because ID meets practical criteria of science. What do I mean by this? ID has a very active research program, which has published hundreds of peer-reviewed pro-intelligent design scientific papers. We'll get into this more in just a few minutes here, okay? We've got 2 more arguments, and you're going to see by the end, the little man is going to be way up in the air, okay? So, number 4, arbitrary requirements of science, they don't apply. What do I mean by this? Well, a 4th problem with saying that ID is not science is that arbitrary requirements of science, like what they call methodological naturalism, do not prevent ID from being science. What do I mean by this? Methodological naturalism basically says that scientific explanations can only invoke natural causes. And they can only invoke natural causes, and if they don't do that, then they can't be science. Now, ID only refers to an intelligent cause, not a supernatural cause necessarily. So ID does not violate the letter of methodological naturalism. But more importantly, ID also does not violate the spirit behind methodological naturalism, because that says that science has to be testable and predictable and repeatable. And as we'll see, ID makes many testable predictions, and it is a valid form of a scientific theory. And then finally, what I call the sauce for the goose argument. It says, if evolution is science, then ID must also be science. So a 5th problem with saying that ID is not science is that ID and evolution are what we call methodologically equivalent. This means that if evolution is considered a scientific theory, then so must ID also be considered science. And if ID is rejected from being a scientific theory, then evolution must also be rejected from being science. Now, I personally believe that ID and evolution are both scientific theories. I think evolution is a very bad scientific theory, but it is a scientific theory. But the point here is that you can't have one without the other. If you're going to say evolution is science, you've got to allow ID to be science. And so now I think that the little man is getting a little bit angry, and he's saying, okay, fine, you win, because he doesn't want evolution to stop being science. Okay, so today, we're going to focus on number 2 and number 3 on this little chart here. We're going to talk about how ID meets rigorous methodological definitions of science and also practical criteria of science. So before we go any further, though, we have to define what is intelligent design. And I'm going to give a definition that's very similar to the definition that is used by Discovery Institute where I work. And here's what I would say is how we define intelligent design. Intelligent design, or ID for short, is a scientific theory that uses the methods of historical sciences to infer that many features of nature are best explained by an intelligent cause because in our experience, they have the kind of information and complexity that only comes from intelligence, okay? And I promise that if this doesn't make sense to you right now, then it'll make sense by the end of this presentation. And if you don't understand me, then Marcos he'll dub me in Portuguese and it'll make perfect sense, okay? All right, so let's break down some key points about the theory of intelligent design. So first of all, ID is first and foremost a scientific theory of design detection. Second of all, ID is a historical science that investigates if design is the best explanation for past events. Next, ID uses a positive argument, which is based upon finding in nature the kind of information and complexity which in our experience always comes from intelligence. Also, ID uses the scientific method to make its claims. And then finally, ID can be applied to guide scientific research that discovers how the natural world operates in the present day. And we're going to go through each of these points in much more detail right now. So don't worry, we're going to cover this in a lot of detail. Okay, so first of all, ID is first and foremost a theory of design detection. So how does ID work to detect design? Well, this is a quote from William Dembski. Have you guys had William Dembski here to speak at your conference before? Very, very good. He's a great guy. Brilliant, brilliant mathematician. And here is what William Dembski says. He says, intelligent design can be formulated as a scientific theory, as a theory of information. Within such a theory, information becomes a reliable indicator of design as well as a proper object for scientific investigation. So what he's saying is that we can use information to detect design. Now, there are many different ways of defining information. I don't have time to go through that in a whole lot of detail right now. If you want to learn about that, by the way, come to our international or summer seminar on intelligent design, which I will talk about at the end of my presentation. But there is a certain type of information which in our experience always comes from intelligence, and that is called complex and specified information, or specified complexity. And this is a quote from Steve Meyer. Have you guys ever had Steve Meyer down here? You need to get Steve Meyer down here if you haven't, okay? Maybe talk to Marcos and I'll work on it. We'll see if we can get Steve Meyer to come down here someday. But here's what Steve Meyer says. He says, our experience-based knowledge of information flow confirms that systems with large amounts of specified complexity, especially codes and languages, invariably originate from an intelligent source, from a mind or a personal agent. So what he's saying is that there's a certain type of information which always comes from intelligence in our experience, and he calls this specified complexity. Now, if that's kind of a complicated term that you don't understand, don't worry. Again, we're going to go over this in more detail in just a minute here. But he gives two examples of specified complexity, codes and languages. And I find this very interesting because what do we find at the very heart of life? At the very heart of life, in our DNA, is a language-based code. And yet in our experience, where does language-based code always come from? It always comes from a mind or a personal agent, as Dr. Meyer says. Okay, so let's explain this concept of specified complexity, also known as complex and specified information. So first of all, something is complex if it is unlikely, okay? So if you look at this, let's say hypothetically that you're looking under a microscope and you see this microorganism here, okay? And it has this sequence of zeros and ones. 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, et cetera, et cetera. Now this is a very, very unlikely sequence of zeros and ones. If I was flipping a coin and for every heads I put a 1, and for every tails, I put a 0, you would be very, very unlikely to get this exact sequence of zeros and ones, okay? Now, the question then comes up, is unlikelihood alone enough to detect design? And the answer to that is no. The fact that something is just unlikely, that by itself is not enough to detect design, okay? So for example, if I flipped a coin 100 times, the exact sequence of zeros and ones, or heads and tails, that you would get would be very, very unlikely. In fact, it would be 1 in 2 raised to the 100th power. Very, very unlikely. However, that's just how things are. Unlikely things happen all the time. And we don't necessarily detect design. Something else is necessary to detect design. And that is what we call specification. Something is specified if it matches an independent pattern. And so it turns out that this sequence of zeros and ones, how many guys in this room do computer programming, by the way? Okay, cool. I wrote about 30,000 lines of Python code during my PhD. Let me tell you, those are things I've tried to forget. However, I've done a lot of computer programming, and this is actually not a random sequence of zeros and ones. This is actually binary code that encodes the ASCII characters that spells out this sentence in the English language. And this is a very famous quote from Richard Dawkins. He said, "Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose." Okay? So of course, Dawkins is the world's most famous atheist and the world's most famous evolutionary biologist. He thinks that natural selection did the designing. But isn't it interesting that Dawkins actually agrees that living things appear to have been designed? So what we in the ID world say is maybe the reason that things appear to be designed is what? Because they really were designed, right? So this is what I mean when we say something is both complex and specified. This is both an unlikely sequence of zeros and ones, but it also matches a pattern, namely computer code that spells out this sentence in the English language. So we immediately recognize that this was designed. I'm going to give you guys another sort of fun or funny way to understand complex and specified information. This is Billy Bob. Billy Bob is going on a tour of mountains of the United States. Okay, so first Billy Bob comes across this mountain. and he says, okay, this mountain has a very, very unlikely shape. The likelihood that this mountain would have a ridge here and a ridge here and a ridge here and a gully here and a gully here, the likelihood that this mountain would have the exact shape that it does is actually very, very low. However, when he looks at this mountain, he says, well, but this looks like a normally shaped mountain. There's no special pattern here that allows me to say that it is specified. Yes, it has an unlikely shape, but it's not specified to match some special pattern. He says, I can easily explain the shape of this mountain through normal geological processes like rain and heating and cooling and freezing and thawing and wind and erosion, etc. So he says, this mountain shape is natural. It was not designed. Now, those of you who follow ID arguments, you probably know where this is going next, right? Because then he comes across this mountain. And he says, oh my goodness, this mountain also has a very, very unlikely shape. However, it's not just unlikely, it also matches a pattern, namely the four faces of four very famous presidents. And I think if Trump has his way, he'll probably put his face up here too pretty soon. But he says, so this is complex, but it also matches a known pattern. We have a specific pattern plus complexity, and that is how we detect design. And so then he goes to the backside, and they say, congratulations, you just used information to detect design, okay? So of course, this is not really what the backside of Mount Rushmore looks like, but you just used information to detect design. So congratulations. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the more sort of really detailed part of this presentation, because I'm going to explain to you how the theory of intelligent design works. Some of you may have heard this before, but I'm pretty sure you've never heard it said just like this. And this is the way that we actually use intelligent design to make scientific discoveries. So the first step is that we learn to recognize design in the natural world. ID theorists study the world around us to identify properties that are associated with intelligent design. And so how can we do that? Well, first of all, we can study objects in the world that we know were designed. We could study a laptop. We could study a garden hose. We could study a car. We could study language that's printed in a book. We could study many different things, objects in the world that we know were designed. The second thing we can study is we can study intelligent agents who are designing things. We have a huge number of intelligent agents in this world, human beings, and we can study them and study the things that they produce and figure out what are some of the criteria, the properties that arise when something is designed. This allows intelligent design to make predictions about what we should find if, in fact, an object was designed. And I'm just listing for you here a few of the many predictions that intelligent design can make. First of all, we have CSI. That, of course, is the short way of saying complex and specified information. There's also irreducible complexity. I know you guys have had Michael Behe here before, right? So he's sort of the master of irreducible complexity, when you have many parts that are necessary for some system to work. That's another thing that in our experience only comes from intelligence. Information in general is a prediction of intelligent design, that we will find new layers of information and control in biology and in natural systems. Blueprints. Intelligent agents will often design a blueprint, and they'll make sure that their design is fully formed and ready to go before they put it out into the world. If you design a car, but it's not really ready to drive or doesn't work quite right yet, nobody's going to want to buy your car. So we create a blueprint. We also create things for a purpose, for a function, or for a reason, okay? So when you look at design objects, they always have a reason for being there, a function, or a purpose. And they often have many parts that are coordinated together to accomplish some higher level purpose, okay? So, I mean, we could think of many examples. Think of all the gears in a clock that work together to turn the hands on the clock so you can see what time it is. We see that parts are coordinated together for a purpose. And then another very interesting thing that intelligent agents do is they will reuse parts that work in different designs. So, for example, we see wheels that are being reused in both cars and airplanes. We see keyboards being reused on both tablets and cell phones. Or we see the computer programmers will often borrow code from other sources so they can write new programs. Okay, this is a very, very common practice to reuse coding modules in different programs. So we can use our observations about what intelligent agents do and what we find in design objects to be able to develop criteria and predictions of what we should expect to find if something was intelligently designed. So that's step number one. Now we go to step number two, and that's very simple. We just seek now to detect design in nature. So how do we do that? Well, we have this natural object X. We put it under the microscope, and what do we find? We find these predictions of intelligent design: CSI, irreducible complexity, information, purpose, reusage of parts, function, blueprints, coordination of parts. And this allows us to detect design. There's a third step also, but we're going to save that for just a few minutes down the road here. So right now what I want to talk to you about is how ID works as an historical science. So how do we study the past? And what does it mean to be a historical science? So historical sciences study past events, and they try to determine what caused them. How did this thing get here? Where did it come from? Paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould said that historical sciences infer history from its results. So they look at the sort of the historical record, they figure out what has happened, and they try to understand what caused those events to happen. And historical sciences use the principle of uniformitarianism, which holds that the present is the key to the past. And what that means basically is we can study causes that are at work in the present day, and then we can ask when they help us to explain events that took place in the past. And by the way, what is a cause that is at work in the present day? Intelligence. We can observe intelligent agents in the present day. And because we can study intelligence and understand what it can produce, this allows us to then apply intelligent design to explain events of the past. But let me give you guys a very, very simple example of a historical argument in science. Let's say that you observe that in the present day, a stream is capable of stripping sediment, taking sediment away from a stream bed, causing it to get deeper, okay? And you therefore infirm, so you observe in the present day that there's this stream bed that's kind of taking sediment away. And you therefore infer that over many years, a large stream or river could cut through an entire gorge. So this is using the principle of uniformitarianism. You observe in the present day that water can erode sediment from a stream, and you infer that over many years, you could actually cut a very, very deep gorge. Maybe it doesn't even take that much time if there's a lot of water, but you're using this principle of uniformitarianism to be able to understand what happened in the past. So again, how does this work with intelligent design? Well, it's very simple. Our ID scientist starts by observing in the present day that intelligence is the known cause of certain types of information. And she then goes out and finds that same kind of information in natural objects. And therefore, she infers that a mind was at work to generate that type of information. And I want you guys to appreciate, this may seem very simple, and I hope it is simple for you, but this is actually very, very important. Because once we realize that intelligence is a cause that we can study and understand its information generative powers in the present day, there is nothing standing in the way of ID becoming a real scientific theory. This right here is what allows ID to be a real scientific theory, because intelligent agency is a cause we can understand and study in the world around us, and then we can use it to explain what has happened in the past. So that's how ID is a historical science. But ID is also a positive argument. What does this mean, and why is it so important to say that ID is a positive argument? Well, to understand what a positive argument is, let's first understand what a negative argument is. So a negative argument basically says theory X is false, okay? So in this form, it's fine to use a negative argument. There's no problem with saying, look, this scientific theory that just doesn't work. In fact, in the next talk, my wife is going to come up and give you guys some really interesting lines of evidence that show why chemical evolution doesn't work, why it's a theory that is false. So we can do this in science. But let's say that you argue this. You say, theory X is false, therefore theory Y is true. Now, this argument has problems, because evidence against one theory does not, in and of itself, necessarily, therefore, constitute evidence for another theory. So you can't just say, oh, this theory is wrong, therefore this other theory is right. You have to provide some positive argument for why you're saying that this theory over here is right. But if we were to argue like this, in sort of this not correct way, if we were to argue like this for intelligent design, this is what it might look like. We would say, look, natural selection cannot generate high CSI, therefore intelligent design. Now, this is actually not a valid argument, because you can't just say, look, I agree with this, that natural selection doesn't work to produce high CSI. But you can't just say natural selection doesn't work, therefore intelligent design. You have to also have some positive argument for intelligent design. And thankfully, this is not how ID argues. ID uses a positive argument. So what does a positive argument say? A positive argument says, theory Z predicts P, P is found, therefore we have positive evidence supporting theory Z. And so this uses a form of reasoning that we call abductive reasoning, where you infer a prior cause based upon finding its known effects in the world around us, okay? So this is what a positive argument looks like. But we immediately then run into a potential problem here. Because what if you have multiple theories that can explain some data point P? So what if theories A, B, and C can also predict P in addition to theory Z? How do we know that Z is the best explanation? And so, for example, some people might claim that a positive abductive argument commits what is called the logical fallacy of affirming the consequent, where you are wrongly inferring a particular cause because there might be other causes, both known and unknown, that can potentially account for the data. So are we committing this error, or is there a way out of committing this logical fallacy? I think there is. In fact, Stephen Meyer and other philosophers of science have said that the solution to this problem is to compare possible explanations and determine which known cause explains the most data. And this is what ID theorist Stephen Meyer and other philosophers of science call comparing the explanatory capabilities of multiple competing explanations and then making an inference to the best explanation. Okay, so how does that work exactly? Let me give you guys a very, very simple example. Let's say that you have 4 theories, okay? You have theory A, B, C, and Z. And you have 4 data points that you're trying to explain, P, Q, R, and S, okay? And you're comparing the explanatory abilities of each of these 4 theories. Now, theory A can only explain data point P. But theory B can explain both P and Q. Theory C can explain P and also data point S over here. But theory Z is special because it can explain all 4 data points P, Q, R, and S. So we would say that theory Z is the best explanation because it can explain the most evidence. And this is how you can test multiple competing hypotheses and ask which ones explain the most data and which one is the best explanation. So this is how this works with intelligent design. According to Stephen Meyer's method of comparing multiple competing hypotheses, when we find informational patterns like high CSI, which in our experience are known to only come from intelligent agents, then we can make a positive inference that intelligent design is the best explanation. And this is what we call detecting design, okay? So how does this work? Again, this might seem very simple. Well, we've got to get the basic logical structure of the argument right if we're going to be able to use ID to do good science. So this is how the argument works. We say, look, intelligence is known to be, from our experience, the cause of high CSI. And natural selection is known to not cause high CSI. Therefore, intelligent design is the best explanation for high CSI. This is a valid argument, and this is, in fact, how ID argues. So just to diagram this out really quickly, how does this work with ID in practice? Well, again, you have an ID theorist, and she sees that intelligence is causing this particular type of information. But then she goes out and studies the natural world some more, and she sees, you know what? When I study natural mechanisms like natural selection, random mutation, it cannot produce this type of information. And then she goes out into the natural world, and she discovers that there is high CSI in the natural world. Therefore, she infers that a mind was at work, because it is the only known cause that can explain this evidence. Okay, so now we understand how ID makes a positive argument. The next point here we're going to talk about is how ID uses the scientific method to make its claim. And why does this matter? Why is this so important? Okay, so the scientific method. If you were to go to my office in downtown Seattle, you would see a wall of biology textbooks. I kind of collect biology textbooks. And many of these textbooks will use the same basic definition of the scientific method. They will say that it involves observation, hypothesis, experiment, and conclusion. And of course, in science, conclusions are never 100% certain, and they're always tentative, subject to future discoveries. And this reflects the fact that in abductive reasoning, you make an inference based upon known causes, but you have to always allow for the possibility that someday a cause that right now we don't know about might be discovered that better explains the data. So we make a scientific conclusion always subject to future discoveries. So how does ID use the scientific method to make its claims? Well, I'm going to give you guys 3 examples right now of how ID uses the scientific method to make its claims. And we're going to start with ID in biochemistry. First, we make the observation that intelligent agents generate highly specified codes and irreducibly complex molecular machines. So that allows us to then make a hypothesis or a prediction that biology will contain high CSI codes and irreducibly complex machines. And in fact, this is exactly what we find. There's been research done by folks in the ID community. I'll talk about this research more in just a few minutes, that has found that the amino acid sequences of proteins have to be very, very, very specified. You need very, very unlikely sequences of amino acids that match the exact pattern that is necessary to give you a functional protein. And that is basically discovering high CSI in proteins. And cells are full of irreducibly complex molecular machines. Therefore, we can conclude that many features of living things were designed. So we're just using the scientific method here to make an argument for a scientific conclusion for intelligent design. It's very, very simple. Let me give you guys another example, this one from the field of genetics. We start with the observation that intelligent agents, they generate things for a purpose or a function, okay? When we do things for a reason, all right? Even when your wife is putting on extra makeup, there's a reason for it, okay? There's always a purpose or a function for why you're doing something, all right? So we can then make a hypothesis or a prediction. So-called junk DNA. You guys have heard of junk DNA. The idea that our genomes are full of useless genetic garbage that doesn't do anything. We can make a prediction that so-called junk DNA and other vestigial organs will actually turn out to have useful functions. And in fact, the research shows that the vast majority of the human genome shows evidence of functionality, including functions for many vestigial organs. There was a project called the ENCODE project, and in 2012, they published a series of papers that found that over 80% of the human genome shows evidence of biochemical functionality. And there have been papers that come out since then that say, look, the days of junk DNA are over. Scientists are now rejecting, many scientists rejecting this idea of junk DNA. So it turns out that ID made a correct prediction here. And the widespread functionality that we see in our DNA and in living systems supports intelligent design. So it's another example of ID using the scientific method. We make an observation, we make a hypothesis, we look at the data, we do experiments, we make a conclusion. Let me give one last example here, the scientific method in physics and cosmology. We can observe that intelligent agents can quickly find very rare or highly unlikely solutions to complex problems. So this can allow us to make a prediction that the physical laws and constants of nature will hold rare values that match exactly what is necessary for life. This is kind of like predicting high CSI embedded into the laws of nature. And in fact, when we look at the physical laws and constants of the universe, physics and cosmology have discovered that they are finely tuned to allow for life to exist in our universe. Things like the gravitational constant, or the speed of light, or the initial entropy of the universe. If they were just slightly different, we would not be able to have a universe where life can exist. So what we conclude is that the cosmic architecture was designed. So we can see now that ID is using the scientific method to make its claims. Now, this actually helps us to overcome one of the first arguments that I made earlier, that philosophers of science have had great difficulty in defining the difference between science and non-science, okay? So let's say that the philosophers are right, that it's very, very difficult. We have science and we have non-science, and the philosophers are right, that it's very difficult to sort of define the difference between science and non-science. We really don't understand the precise contours of this boundary. Even if we don't know exactly how to define science and non-science, I think one thing is clear, that anything that is making its claims based upon the scientific method is going to be on the science side of this line. And guess what? It just so happens that intelligent design is one of these things that uses the scientific method to make its claim. So we can make a very powerful argument that ID is science because it uses the scientific method to make its claims. Now, I need to ask another very important question, because sometimes the angry man will say, look, you're just saying ID did it or God did it, and that's the end, okay? ID doesn't really lead to new or interesting scientific questions. So is this really the end of Design Inteligente? Are we just saying that ID did it or God did it and then going home? And the answer is no, okay? ID can do a lot more than this. So this is my final main point today, is that we can apply intelligent design to figure out how nature operates, to help us do good science. It can serve as a heuristic and a paradigm to guide our scientific research. So what exactly can ID help us discover, and how do we use ID to do this? Well, let's do a little review here, okay? So first of all, we're going to remember, how does the theory of intelligent design work? And our first step was that we have to learn to recognize design. We study objects in the world around us that we know were designed. We study intelligent agents that are designing things. And this then allows us to understand that ID predicts things like CSI, information, irreducible complexity, blueprints, purpose, reusage of parts in different designs, coordination of parts, function, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? Then the next step is we go out and we detect design. We study objects in the natural world whose origin is as of yet unknown to see if they meet the criteria for detecting design. But now we can do a third step, okay? So what is this third step? This third step is we're going to apply design detection criteria to investigate the natural world. So having established that there is evidence for design throughout the natural world, ID gains confidence in its theory. And we can then model or predict when natural or what natural systems should look like if, in fact, they were designed. And we're effectively applying design detection criteria to predict what we should find in nature if, in fact, these systems were designed. And then we can better understand how natural systems actually operate. So this is how we do this, very, very simply. We find this natural object. We'll call it Y. We then recall, okay, ID predicts all these different things: CSI, coordination of parts, reusage, information, irreducible complexity, et cetera, et cetera. And this then allows us to develop a testable ID-based model about how natural Y should operate and function in the present day. And then we can study natural object Y to see if our ID-based model correctly describes how it works, okay? So this very simply is how ID can help us. We can apply intelligent design to actually study natural objects in the present day and understand how things work. So where is ID research at today? In Discovery Institute, we call our research program the ID 3.0 research program. But in order to have 3.0, you first have to have ID 1.0 and 2.0. So I'm going to go over a very quick review of ID research and what we've been doing over the last 30 or 40 years or so. And we're going to talk about where ID research is at today, and I'll give you guys some examples. So ID 1.0, we would say that this was around 1984 to 1999. And during this time, we developed some of the basic theories of design detection, of the information. We're talking about concepts like irreducible complexity, specified complexity, and William Dembski's explanatory filter. Some very good and important books came out during this time: The Mystery of Life's Origin, Darwin's Black Box, and The Design Inference. And we published about 8 peer-reviewed publications, okay? The angry man always wants to know, are you publishing peer-reviewed papers? So we'll talk about that. Yes, ID is publishing peer-reviewed papers, and hopefully that will let our critics know. So ID 2.0 then came next, and that lasted from about the year 2000 until 2015. And during this period, we began to experimentally apply the methods developed in ID 1.0 to real-world systems. The focus was on studying protein evolvability, and we also began to really articulate the positive case for design through inferences to the best explanation. And what was really cool about ID 2.0 is we began to see some ID-oriented labs emerge, such as the Biologic Institute or the Evolutionary Informatics Lab. And some very good books came out, including Signature in the Cell, Darwin's Doubt, and The Edge of Evolution. And during this time, ID published about 70 peer-reviewed scientific publications. So that's ID 2.0. I'll tell you guys a little story. In 2015, this was just a few months before my wife and I moved to South Africa to do my PhD. John West and Steve Meyer came to me at Discovery Institute and they said, Casey, we think we have some funding to fund some ID research projects. Could you come up with some ideas for ID research? And I said, sure, no problem. Took a little while and came up with about 50 ideas for ID research projects. But then I thought, you know what? We have so many great scientists in the ID community. I bet that many of them have many, many better ideas than what I came up with. So I decided to crowdsource this question. And I got on the phone, this was before the days of Zoom, and I called every scientist I knew in the ID community. Spent many hours on the phone. Long story short is by the end of this, I'd come up with a list of over 230 potential ID research projects and put together a whole big research program that I called ID 3.0. And that's where we get our current research project program, which is called ID 3.0. That's where it got its name from. And so this started in 2016, and it's still going strong all the way to right now. So what are we doing in ID 3.0? Well, we are extending ID research to new systems and using ID to answer questions and make novel contributions in burgeoning fields like synthetic biology, systems biology, epigenetics, genomics, junk DNA, phylogenetics, information theory, population genetics, ontogenetic information, paleontology, quantum cosmology, cosmic fine-tuning, and many others. There's a special emphasis on unexpected features of the genome and new layers of biological information. And we're no longer interpreting other people's data, okay? When Darwin wrote Origin of Species, most of what he did is he just looked at ideas and data that already existed. And that's fine. You can do that in science, okay? What we're doing now is we're actually generating our own data and asking questions that ID both inspires and answers. We're currently funding over 25 separate labs, research groups, and projects, and there have been over 150 peer-reviewed papers already published in the last 10 or so years. So we're really excited about the success of the ID 3.0 research program. And to make a long story short, there are two basic types of research that we are funding. Number one, we call it pure design research. And this basically asks how, where, or when can we detect design. And the other type of research is called applied design research. And this is where we are applying design reasoning to better understand how natural systems work. So I'm going to give you guys a few examples of each type of research and the research that we are doing. So pure design research, one of the best examples of this that we funded came from Douglas Axe. You guys may have heard about this research before, but he basically did mutational sensitivity experiments on the beta-lactamase enzyme in bacteria. And what he found is that only 1 in 10 to the 77th amino acid sequences would yield a functional protein fold in a fairly typical enzyme. And this shows an astounding degree of high CSI in proteins. And this research was published, by the way, in the Journal of Molecular Biology. But Axe didn't just stop there. He then founded the Biologic Institute Lab. And Doug Axe, along with biologists Ann Gager and Marcy Reeves, they then published multiple research papers showing that if you want to convert one protein to perform the function of a very similar protein, even a very closely related protein, would require more mutations than could arise over the entire history of the Earth, because the mutations have to be coordinated. Again, this shows high CSI in proteins. And it would be very, very difficult for this idea that you can sort of take a protein, co-opt it, change it, tweak it, retool it, and then have it perform a slightly different function in a different system. This would be very, very difficult for blind evolutionary mechanisms to do. And they published some really good research with experimental results showing that this was true. Another really exciting research project that we're funding at Discovery Institute is called the Orphan Gene Project. And this comes from the fact that as we are sequencing more and more genomes of different organisms, it's been discovered that many genes in each organism are unique and unlike any other known genes. And these are called orphan genes. Now, this actually, it's been estimated that up to 10 to 30% of an organism's genome might consist of these unique orphan genes. It's really amazing. In fact, when this data first started to come out, evolutionists were very skeptical. And they said, you know what? As we sequence more and more genomes, they predicted that the number of known orphan genes would go down because it's very, very strange to have unique genes according to evolution. According to evolution, genes evolve from other genes. And potential evolutionary gene sources are identified by finding other genes with similar DNA sequences. So when you find these unique orphan genes, they show a genetic discontinuity between species. And this challenges standard evolutionary models because they have no gene source from which these orphan genes might be able to evolve. And so, again, evolutionists predicted that as we sequenced more and more and more genomes, that the number of orphan genes would actually drop because they would find, you know, this gene might look like an orphan right now, but maybe as we sequence another species genome, we'll find a similar gene there, and so this will no longer be an orphan gene. But guess what happened? The opposite actually happened. As we have sequenced more and more genomes, the number of orphan genes has actually gone up. And this is another fulfilled prediction of intelligent design. Orphan genes are expected under intelligent design because they show that information in biology need not be connected to some material antecedent, okay? Information is discontinuous from other material entities because information comes from a mind and not matter. A mind does not need to have some pre-existing template in order to build a new design, a new system. Minds can come up with blueprints, give you a new informational pattern that doesn't look like anything else you've ever seen before. And so orphan genes are a prediction of intelligent design. And actually, our research team that's looking at this about a year and a half ago published a paper in the journal PLOS One, which is a very, very good biology journal, a scientific journal, that they're developing tools for allowing us to detect these orphan genes in the genomes of different organisms. Okay, another really interesting ID research project is looking at organismal relationships. You guys have all heard of the idea of universal common ancestry, the idea that all species are related. Well, of course, evolutionary theory claims that species are related through universal common descent, often represented in a tree of life like what we see right here. And the main evidence that's often cited to support the tree of life is patterns of similarity between different organisms. Now, ID actually allows for the possibility of common descent, okay? ID is not necessarily incompatible with common descent, but I personally am very skeptical of common ancestry. And in fact, one of the reasons why is that ID can also explain why there are similarities between different organisms, and that is through common design, where similarities can be the result of a designer reusing parts that work in different designs. And in fact, computer scientist Winston Ewart, he's developed what he calls a dependency graph model of organismal relationships. And this is based upon his observation that programmers often reuse coding modules in different systems. And he says, look, if programmers can reuse different coding modules in different systems, then maybe the same thing can go on in different species, that a designer can reuse different coding modules in the DNA in different species. So he's written some papers developing this idea. In his first paper, he compared the distribution of gene families in dozens of species, and he found that it fit a common design-based dependency graph model 10 to the 3,000th times better than a Darwinian evolutionary tree, okay? So his ID-based model worked much better than a standard phylogenetic tree. to explain the distribution of these different gene families among different organisms. But then he published a second paper where he focused on one particular trait, and that is echolocation. Now, you guys all know echolocation is like found in bats and whales, where they will use sound to be able to navigate to find food or swim around or fly, okay? Now, this is very interesting. Both bats and whales use echolocation, but they are, as you might imagine, they're very, very different organisms, and they're very distant on the supposed mammal tree of life, okay? So common ancestry cannot explain why this trait is shared by both bats and whales. Common ancestry can't explain why you see echolocation in bats and also in whales. So evolutionists often resort to what they call convergent evolution. And this is the idea that the same trait, just by chance, happened to evolve independently in two totally different species. And that's exactly what we see with echolocation in bats and whales. But what he's saying is that, look, the likelihood of this happening in nature is very, very low. The likelihood that echolocation would evolve in both bats and whales is very, very low. So he thinks that common design is a much better model, and he's published a dependency graph model in the second paper that shows that that is a superior model to Darwinian evolution to explain why you see echolocation in both bats and whales. Okay, one final example of pure design research. This project is evaluating whether the geological record allows enough time to evolve the mutations required for new complex biological features. And this is a direct test of whether standard evolutionary mechanisms can produce the information in life or whether intelligent design is implicated. And their team has published 2 papers developing a mathematical model, and they're currently looking at the evolvability of whales. According to evolutionists, whales are, obviously they swim in the sea, in the marine water, but whales supposedly evolved from land mammals, okay? But if you look at the fossil record and you just take the standard geological time that even evolutionists adopt, what it says is that whales evolved from land mammals in less than 10 million years. Actually, might even be a lot less, but we could just say 10 million years, because that's kind of the standard view. Even I remember when I was in school taking courses in paleontology and geobiology and learning, my professor said that whales evolved incredibly fast, okay? So the question is that enough time for all these complex traits that allow whales to swim in the sea? Is that enough time for them to evolve all those traits from a land mammal? And right now, this is what they're looking at. But they published a paper in the Journal of Theoretical Biology a few years ago where they put out a very, very detailed mathematical model for addressing these questions. It's a really, really successful project. Okay, let's talk about applied design research. Remember, applied design research is when we were using intelligent design to figure out how nature operates. And one of my favorite examples of this is junk DNA. In fact, let me tell you guys a little story. When I was an undergraduate student at the University of California, San Diego, this was in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. This was before they had done the Human Genome Project, okay? So we still did not know a lot about the genome. And during this time, I had a little student club there called the Intelligent Design and Evolution Awareness Club, or the IDEA Club for short. And we would invite everybody to come to our club and have debates, okay, whether they were an undergraduate, graduate students, professors, if they were an intelligent design proponent, or an evolutionist, or an atheist, or a Christian, or a Hindu, or a Muslim, or a Buddhist, or Jew, or whatever they were, everybody was welcome at our little club to come and debate intelligent design. And let me tell you, the number one argument that we would get against intelligent design, guess what it was? At that time, it actually wasn't that ID wasn't science, it was junk DNA. People would say, look, the vast majority of our genome doesn't do anything, okay? Maybe like 2% of our genome encodes proteins, but probably most of the rest of the genome, it's basically what they called junk DNA. And they said that no designer would ever put that much useless genetic garbage into our genomes. Therefore, intelligent design must be false. Now, again, this was in the late 90s and early 2000s. So my response was basically, look, you don't really know that this is all junk DNA. You don't really know that this DNA isn't doing anything. There's so much we don't know about the genome, and I think it's much wiser to adopt a wait and see approach. Let's wait and see what the research shows, and let's see if it really turns out that this DNA really is, in fact, junk. So I wasn't the only person who said this. other ID theorists like William Dembski, Forrest Mims, Jonathan Wells, Richard Sternberg, around this same time, they were also saying, look, intelligent design predicts that junk DNA is going to have a function. And the reason why is because we know from our experience with intelligent agents that they make things for a purpose or for a reason. So ID proponents have long predicted that junk DNA would turn out to be functional. And guess what? We now know that ID was right. In fact, 2 years ago, there was a paper in the journal Bioessays which found that we have had a Kuhnian paradigm shift away from the idea of junk DNA. If you know your history of science, you know that Thomas Kuhn was a very famous historian of science, and he would say that scientific theories would go through what he called paradigm shifts. So what this paper basically is saying is we have had a paradigm shift in biology away from the idea of junk DNA. So ID proponents were some very early critics of junk DNA, and now we actually have researchers in our community who are looking at function for junk DNA, and at Discovery Institute we have launched a research group, it's called the Junk DNA Work Group, to do research on this topic. So if you want to get involved with this little group, they're just getting started, and they're starting to think about what kind of research can we do to look at function for junk DNA. Come talk to me and I'll get you plugged in to this little research group. But this is also, I think, perhaps my favorite example of applied design research. This is being done by Michael Egnor, a professor of neurosurgery at State University, Stony Brook. Just published a great book titled The Immortal Mind. So here's the research that he's doing. Every time your heart beats, it pulses blood through your brain, right? But it turns out that if these pulses of blood are not carefully controlled, they would actually burst the fragile capillaries throughout your brain. So what Michael Egnor did is he applied the assumption that the brain is a design system. And he then tried to understand how our physiology and our anatomy allows blood to flow smoothly into and through the brain without bursting all your capillaries in the brain. And so what he's done is he's carefully measured blood flow. And he and his team have discovered that brain capillary blood flow is controlled by what's called a band stop filter, and cerebrospinal fluid is controlled by what's called a band pass filter. Now what's amazing is these ideas are already part of the field of electrical engineering. What they found is that the human-designed technology field of electrical engineering helped us to discover how blood flow is controlled in the brain. So they published a couple of papers, one in the journal Biocomplexity and another in the Journal of Neurosurgery Pediatrics, with ongoing work analyzing the data to assess their model of brain blood flow control. And Dr. Egnor anticipates that his ID-inspired model could lead to improved treatments of brain bleeds. So what we're seeing is that when we apply this idea that the human body was engineered, that it was designed, we can actually make progress in understanding how it works. It's really quite amazing. Another example of using engineering to study biology comes from my colleague at Discovery Institute, Dr. Emily Reeves. Do you guys remember Emily when she spoke here a couple years ago? She's fantastic and she's doing great research. So what Emily has studied is the glycolysis pathway. This is a key and universal metabolic pathway that helps perform vital functions such as producing energy or helping to synthesize life's building blocks. And led by Emily, this project is applying this reversed systems engineering approach to understand why glycolysis works the way it does. And what they found in this paper that they published in an engineering journal is that biological systems exhibit features that are traditionally associated with good top-down requirements-driven systems engineering practices, such as modularity, optimality, robustness, common protocols, and design reuse. In other words, when we apply the assumption that living systems were designed, and then we try to reverse engineer living systems, we can understand why they work the way we do. And Emily actually, she's a biochemist, but Emily teamed up with a professional engineer from Texas. And he's an engineering professor. And they published a paper in an engineering journal that found that they can better explain why organisms use glycolysis so widely. Here's what I mean. According to the standard view, the reason why glycolysis is near universal across the tree of life, that has been attributed to universal common ancestry, okay? But they found that from a systems engineering perspective, if we take the view that life was engineered and designed, then we can actually expect to find this uniformity of glycolysis in different species. And the reason why is because glycolysis pathways maximize thermodynamic efficiency and use recyclable waste products, which simplify the maintenance of ecosystem homeostasis. What they're saying is that the reason that we find glycolysis reused all across the tree of life is not because of universal common ancestry, but because it uses good engineering principles. And it's a good design principle, good design strategy to reuse designs that work very efficiently in different systems. And that's exactly what we see with glycolysis. And so Emily and her team are doing great, great work. I'll give you guys a final example of ID research that's kind of similar. How many of you guys have ever seen a diagram like this in your biology textbook, where they show the vertebrate limbs, maybe the limb of a bat or a whale or a horse and a human, and they say the reason why these different vertebrates have the same bone pattern is because of homology, which reflects the fact that they share a common ancestor, okay? And this is supposed to be sort of an argument for common ancestry, because they all have a very similar bone structure. But what if there are good functional design reasons for these skeletal similarities that have nothing to do with common ancestry? Well, once again, if we apply the assumption that living organisms were designed and engineered, we can better understand why they work the way they do. And in fact, at Discovery Institute, we funded an engineer from the UK named Stuart Burgess, and he did an engineering analysis of the vertebrate limb. And he found that the reason why the vertebrate limb structure is used over and over again, it's not because of common descent, but because it is a highly versatile and optimal system, not just for arms and legs, but also for flippers and wings, because it uses networks of segmented bones that enable smooth morphing of shapes as well as multifunctioning structures, and it fine-tunes motions and mechanical advantage. And he even recommended that we should use this same sort of limb structure in human-designed robots. He said this was in a peer-reviewed paper that he published last year in the journal Bioinspiration and Biomimetics. He found that the vertebrate limb has significant potential for the bio-inspired design of robotic and prosthetic limbs. This is basically a takedown of the vertebrate limb icon of evolution that you guys have all seen in your textbooks. He's saying, look, the reason that the vertebrate limb is reused is not because of common descent, but because of its good engineering and common design. So, look, I've talked today about 8 or so of the research projects that we have funded in our research program at Discovery Institute. But we have many other projects that we're funding. So if you want to know more, whip out your phone, take a picture of this QR code, and you can go to that website and learn more about our research project. But I want to make something very clear. We can't even list all the research projects that we are funding on our website. And the reason why is that although the researchers that we fund support ID, many of them are sort of undercover. And if it was publicly known that they support intelligent design, they could actually lose their jobs and lose their careers. So we cannot even talk about all the research we're funding. But we want to talk about peer-reviewed scientific papers. The little angry man said, this is very important. If you want to show ID as science, you have to be able to show that ID is publishing real science. Well, guess what? This is an up-to-date current chart as of this presentation. This is cut off. Peer-reviewed pro-ID scientific papers. We published 306 papers as of today, and it's going up all the time. So this is really exciting. But again, if you go to our research website, we can't even list every paper because many of these papers were published by researchers who are still undercover. And if it was publicly known that they supported ID, they might lose their careers. They could be negatively impacted. So this is the total number of peer-reviewed ID papers over time. But look at this chart. This shows the number of peer-reviewed pro-ID papers published per year. Can you see it? So this is basically for you math nerds in here. This is basically the first derivative of this chart here. Okay, this is the slope. You can see that the slope is going up over time. The number of papers we publish per year is going up. So there's a trend. Our research program is growing. And we published many papers in peer-reviewed journals. Journal of Theoretical Biology, Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences, Proceedings of the Biological Society of Washington, International Journal of Design, Nature, and Ecodynamics, Mathematical Intelligencer, Encyclopedia of Life Sciences, Annual Review of Genetics, BMC Biology, Biophysical Journal, Biocomplexity, Biocosmos, Journal of Molecular Evolution. You guys want me to keep going? Okay, I'll keep going. Biosystems, IEEE Open Journal of Systems Engineering. Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology. Bioinspiration and Biomimetics, Systems Engineering. Molecular Cancer Research. Active Biotheoretica. Journal of Neurosurgery Pediatrics, Journal of Royal Statistical Society, C, Scientific Reports, PLOS ONE, Bioessays, ACS Omega, Journal of Bacteriology, and the Journal of Molecular Biology. This is just some of the papers that our research program is publishing in. The bottom line is that we have a real research program that is publishing serious research in highly credible scientific journals. If you want to go to our website, whip out your phone again, take a picture of this QR code for our public list of peer-reviewed pro-ID papers. Okay, so some conclusions here. ID uses scientific methods of historical sciences to make positive, predictive, empirically testable claims that are supported by the evidence. ID has a vibrant, active research program that has published hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers. And ID can be applied to guide research that discovers how the natural world operates in the present day. So no matter how you slice it, ID is a bona fide, that means a real scientific theory that is making advancements to lead biology into the 21st century. And again, I want to say, look, if you are here and you're a scientist and you want to get involved with our research program, I'm going to be here all weekend. Please come talk to me, and I'd love to ask you, how will you get involved? And look, at this point, I think the little angry man, there's nothing more he can say. ID is science, you win, all right? So there you go. So one last thing here, you guys. I know that many of you are probably also students. If you want to do sort of a deep dive on intelligent design, go to this website or whip out your phone, take a photo of the QR code. We have a student program that has an online international seminar on intelligent design. We would love to have you guys join this. I'll give you guys a second. Send this to students that you know. Unfortunately, it is in English, so you might have to work through that, but it's a great program. We actually just had our 2025 program last weekend. We had over 50 students from all around the world joining us for these online sessions, and it's really exciting. We'd love to have you guys join us. So I want to say obrigado, and I want to dedicate this talk to our beloved friends, Dr. Jonathan Wells, Gunter Beckley, and Walter Bradley, who all have passed away in the last year. Some great ID scientists. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants here. So thank you guys so much. Obrigado.